right, all right, all right, all right. All right. Who's excited about planning? Oh, that was me. Come on now. Get excited. My mother's texting me complaining about the Zoom. Sorry, Mother. How's everyone feeling right now? How are we doing? Good? Yes? I see some familiar faces. I see some new faces. For whom is it your first time at Manny's? Raise your hand. From Boston, right? How do you know? Because you just told me. Keep those hands raised. Yeah, okay, first time. All right, awesome. Why are you here? Why did you decide to come tonight? Curious, want to learn more? What's your name? Sean, welcome. And my Bostonian friend?
I'm Ryan.
Ryan.
Yes.
First Manny's event. Just got off the plane.
Straight here.
Good choice. I love it. Well, welcome. Thank you for coming here. Manny's is a civic and political venue. We host, as you may have seen, many events every night around politics, social justice, the world, civic life. And at the beginning, we started this thing called the Local Leaders Series, where every month we bring one local civic leader who is involved in the mechanics of our city of San Francisco, for you to actually meet this person, get to know them, and ask your questions, because we feel like that's pretty damn cool, and there should be a place where you can go to do it. And so it's our longest running series, I'm proud to say, and tonight we're very lucky to have the director of the planning department, Rich Hillis, with us. We have a small tradition here at Manny's that I'd like to continue, which is just to take 30 to 45 seconds and someone around you that you do not already know, introduce yourself to them and ask them, I want the question to be, what is your favorite building in San Francisco? Okay, take 45 seconds, introduce yourself to someone around you don't know, and find out what their favorite building is in San Francisco. All right. Okay, anyone have some fabulous buildings they want to share that they just were amazing, like light bulb moments? What was your favorite building that you said in your partner?
I really like the Mint building,
the
like
Mint?
the Castro of Safeway.
Oh, awesome. Okay, I've never been in. Have you been inside? No. Okay. What about a couple other folks? Favorite building that it bears mentioning? Jim, what did you say? I bet I know what you said. City Hall? City Hall. All right. One more? What about here? What was the favorite building?
The favorite building is the YMCA.
Interesting.
Has a lot of history. Or the Fillmore building,
Yoshi's? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I said the Hibernia Bank building. Has anyone been inside the Hibernia Bank building? Oh my God, you have? Okay, that's unsurprising. You have. The Hibernia Bank's building has this dome, and I almost put Manny's there, but it was too small. Anyway, let's bring the director of the planning department up to the stage. Rich Hillis. Okay, so you've got a mic there. You have
We on? This is on.
You're on, yes. You have a glass of Chardonnay as well, which you're gonna need tonight.
Mine was the Embarcadero.
I was gonna ask you, so tell me, so what's your favorite building in the
I
city?
have a bunch. The Embarcadero Center, I like.
All of them?
Well, they, they're kind of
Connected?
come as a unit. 8 Octavia, which is a, if you went like new building, Stanley Sayowitz is new building on Octavia in Market is one.
Is that the one that's kind of concrete and glass?
Yeah, with the things, yeah.
Yeah, I also looked at that ground floor retail space, but it's very weirdly built.
Still vacant.
And still vacant, I didn't want to mention that, but,
Well,
so beautiful building, not the most useful for ground floor retail.
Yeah.
Just those two?
I mean,
I guess, yeah, I said favorite building, so that's it, that's all you get. Do you get pitched a lot by people saying, hey, I've got a great idea for the city and you should do it? Like a planning, do you get, what are some funny ones a year?
I mean, building, people will come in obviously and pitch buildings.
Like what?
Someone pitched this week actually, the tallest building, they wanna build the tallest building in San Francisco, it's a residential tower, taller than Salesforce. Which I probably shouldn't be talking about.
Oh my god, people don't like that
Because
idea?
it was serious, it
Why don't
was-
you like that? That sounds awesome. You say what?
So if you think about the buildings that are that tall around Central Park.
Yeah.
People who bought property there have now ex-post decided it's not so hot, so.
Why? Because it's nauseating or?
Not, well, it's just really hard to have very good, I don't know if you're in here, but it's really hard to have good things like AC, noise, dampening, all that sort of stuff in something that's that high.
I see. You don't like this idea?
I don't mind it. I mean, it was a little jarring to see it next to the Salesforce Tower. I mean, it's in the Salesforce Tower, it's relatively new, it was 800 units of housing. I like the idea of housing. A housing building being the tallest building in San Francisco.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
Yeah. But we're just back to pitch, 20 years ago, when I didn't work for planning, I worked for economic development of the city. Somebody pitched, which I regret it not being built, Terrapin Station, it was gonna be like a Grateful Dead experience.
For those of you who don't, I don't know what that means. So what is that reference?
You know, the Grateful Dead,
I actually, okay, some people help me out. I don't really know the Grateful Dead so well.
but the band, yeah.
I know who they are and that they did a lot of acid, but I don't know much of their songs. Do you know any Grateful Dead songs, Rob? No, you don't. Neither do I. So I'm just trying to create some community for those who don't understand the reference. So can you explain what that means? Is that a song?
Well, no, the Grateful Dead is a band.
No, but
right?
Terrapin Station,
Oh,
what is
Terrapin
that?
Station, I think it's an album, right? I'm not a big Deadhead either, it's Terrapin.
It's like a 30-minute ballad, like a long epic song.
And
Is
this
it good?
This is a building that would have somehow.
It was gonna be down at Trans Bay. Do you remember, Jim, this being proposed? And it was like an experience, you know, back in the day when entertainment retail was popular, like Sony Metrodon. When it first opened was an entertainment retail complex, you can kind of walk through these weird, it's like a little Disneyland. What was that book? There was the Maurice Sendak book, there was like an experience.
We're the wild thing.
Where
They're
the
doing that with the
wild-
Van Gogh on Van Ness and Market, aren't they?
Yeah,
Same
but
same
that was, Sony Metrodon was kind of a weird spot originally. It was it's failed, I mean, it's a failed experiment, it's turned into a mall and a movie theater at Target. Much more solid use. You know,
I
than
see.
Maurice Sendak.
Okay, so
Is this the shtick, we're doing this shtick?
it's gonna be one long
We're
shit
just
the whole
riffing.
night. We're just gonna riff off each other. I will ask a couple serious questions though.
Okay.
The first being, I think when people hear the planning, what do people think when they say the planning department? What do they think it does? Can I get like 2 or 3 people? What do you think the planning department does?
Not much.
Not much. Zing, what do you think the planning department does? We're not gonna reveal the identity of that person.
Tells people they can't build housing.
Tells people they can't build housing.
This hurts.
Does, you like my snap? What do you think the planning department does?
Zoning.
Zoning question mark? Okay, what does the planning department do?
Well, I think there's 2 main functions, right? It's one to look at projects that are coming in and making sure they comply with the zone, with the planning code. You know, that they're appropriate, they meet the planning code, they meet the height requirements, the use, they've got ground floor retail. So that's kind of our regulatory function. And then we've got kind of the long range planning function, like where's the city going? How do we solve some of the big issues we have? How do we grow responsibly? So there's the longer range kind of look at the city, and that ultimately will lead to code changes. And then kind of, looking at projects and reviewing. Sounds accurate, right?
Well, I know that it's a little hard to answer this question, but do you think there's too much code, it's too complicated?
Yes.
Like, do you think it should just be a lot easier to build
Yes,
things?
yeah.
And well, aren't you the boss? Can't you do?
Well,
change it?
I don't write the code, nor can
Can't
I.
you, couldn't you say,
No.
bibbidi bobbidi boo?
So the code is law, right? And so law is made by the board of supervisors, and the mayor signs it or vetoes it or makes her, introduces code herself. So no, we're kind of, we recommend code changes.
Can she uncode herself? Like, can
Sure.
she- And have you asked her to do that?
Yeah, she recently did it, so there was she proposed legislation to make it easier to convert auto-oriented uses on the western side of the city, areas of the city. We haven't seen a lot of housing being built.
Why is
to
that?
housing, because the code doesn't allow it. So I mean, one kind of fun fact about our code is generally what you see in the city, especially in the western side of the city where I live, in like north of Panhandle or the Richmond or the Sunset, you can't even build what's there now under the current code. So, at some point in the 70s, the board and the mayor downzoned or established a zoning code that the limitations were less than what's currently. So like I live in an RH3 district, where if you came and wanted to build something now, you can only build 3 residential units. But next door to me is a 10-unit building, on the corner is a 12-unit building. So in most places in the city, you can't build what's already there. You couldn't build the neighborhood that's already there.
Why?
Because the board in the
No, but
70s.
no, I'm saying, why did they do that? Like, what do you think the real reason is? Like,
I mean-
what was the up here reason? Then honey, what was this reason?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it was the 60s and the 70s, there wasn't a great interest to live in the city anymore. Part of it was racist, we were trying to protect, make the city look more like the suburbs. And put in single family zoning that wouldn't allow for apartment buildings that lower income and people of color lived in. So, you go back to the area of redevelopment in the Western Addition and in Yerba Buena. That's what was driving some of the code changes.
So they
So
were
what-
seeing what was happening there and they didn't want it
They
to be
wanted
like
to-
that in their neighborhoods, and so they changed the codes to make it harder for it to be redeveloped in that way.
Yeah, to make it a bit more suburban.
And I mean, I know this is much harder to answer than in a soundbite, but it seems like there are a lot of people who want to undo some of this, that want to make it, that have seen this and have seen the housing crunch and
Yeah.
say, it shouldn't be quite so hard to build housing.
Yeah.
Why do you think it is so hard to change these rules now? Truly, I mean, why has it been so hard to upzone the west side?
Yeah.
And undo, I mean, because it's been a while, right? It's been 50 years since that time, so.
Right. I think, the main reason is people like this city, right? If you live here, you like it, and you like your neighborhood. And so there's a resistance to changing your neighborhood. So if you lived in the Sunset, it's generally single family.
I did
homes.
once,
It wasn't great.
it was just so not sunny at all,
Yeah.
so I'm never doing that again.
Where'd you live?
Third in Irving. So it wasn't even deep
Right,
sunset.
it wasn't, that's like inner sunset, that's
Yeah.
nice, yeah.
Yeah.
Not that outer sunset's not nice. I'm a big fan of Yoloa, 48.
Really? Why? What's there? I like, my favorite coffee shop is Outerlands at Judah and,
Yeah, 46.
yeah, okay, thank you, Tomas.
But I think people like their neighborhoods, right? I mean, people are passionate about San Francisco and their neighborhoods, and they don't necessarily want it to change.
So how do you balance, because I get that, I live in the Castro, I love my neighborhood,
Yeah.
it is gorgeous, it's Borgiana, And I probably, if you asked me like, would you want the whole Castro area to be like demoed and made into like, you know, Bulgarian style apartment buildings, I'd probably say no. No offense to Bulgaria in particular.
Yeah.
But, you know, how do you balance that soul and that beauty of San Francisco and
It's
the need for
hard.
development?
It's hard, and I'll tell you a story, like there was once, I don't know why I thought of this, but there's that, you know, on Potrero, there's that new building, Handel architecture, it's got kind of a crisscross. It's pretty large, by Potrero Center and 16th, you know what I'm talking about?
Oh,
You know what I'm talking about, what's that building called? Yeah.
oh, yeah, that one, that's cool, yeah.
If you asked me a couple of years ago what my favorite building is in San Francisco, I said that, I like the architecture, it's good, Potrero can take that height. It's nice, but then like some of my kids' friends had people over, you know, to their house like after a soccer game, so we went over. And I told them, oh, that's my favorite building in the city, and but it looms large over their backyard, like it shadows their back, and they're like, we hate it. You know, and I think that's part of the problem, it's impactful for people who live there. So those are the people who are most vocal about things being changed, they're not like, hey, yeah, it's great, new housing. You know, it's looms large over their backyard.
So is it possible
still
that
like
the
it,
city is too nice? And because it's so precious and gorgeous and nice, if you change, like, okay, I live at 18th and Douglas, right? So I'm imagining like thank you. I didn't have anything to do with it, but other than choosing to live there, I guess. If someone were to demolish one of the Victorians and want to build like a 10-story building, it would, you know, loom large over the
Yeah.
neighborhood. So do you feel like you need to just build like a lot of housing really quickly so that like it like kind of all happens at once? Or because it does feel like, how are you gonna actually build it if you build like one development in a neighborhood and it's all Victorians and then everyone, you know, freaks out?
Well, we have to do it smartly, like we have to look at clearly commercial corridors in the Richmond and the Sunset can take more density and more height. And right now, the code on Valencia allows you on a lot, the same size as a lot on Geary to build significantly more housing. There's not density controls here in Valencia, we generally are control what you can build by the height in the rear yard. But on Geary, the old school kind of 1970s zoning says you can only build one unit per 800 square feet of lot area.
And are you involved in advocating for that to change?
Yes.
Or do you feel like you kind
No,
of have to
we are
stay
Absolutely,
stone-faced about it?
no, we're absolutely.
And how's that
advocating
going?
So, I mean, the first step we're taking is the housing element, so the state requires us to do a housing element every 8 years and say how we're gonna build what's called our RENA requirement, so the state says you've got to build a certain number of housing units, the state has told us we need to build 80,000 housing units, 83,000 housing units over 8 years, starting in 2023. So that's about 10,000 units per year. The most we've built, and it feels like we've built a lot of housing over the last 10, 20 years, is about 5,000 units per year, 4,500 units per year. So they want us to build double, you know, what we've been building, our highest amount that we've been building today, which is a huge challenge given the physical aspects of the city, but the political aspects, the political nature of the city. So the first step is to develop a housing element that will have policies and suggested zoning changes to get to that 80,000 units of housing. But, you know, it's not just demo every Victorian in the city and build a 10-story building. It's looking at commercial corridors like Geary, adding some height, allowing additional density, changing some of our RH1 zoning, our RH2, which only allows single family zones, like allow for 4 units, 6 units on corner lots. So we're in the process of doing it, and you can participate also, you know, as part of our development of the housing.
Do you feel optimistic? Are you an optimist?
I am an
I'm
optimist.
trying to suss you out, I can't tell.
No, I'm an optimist, but am I optimistic about things? Not really.
I see. Just one more, I mean, there might be more questions about housing, you know, it's a big issue in our city,
Yeah, it's
but
huge.
for me in particular, on this topic right now, there seems to be a divide in our city, and I think you saw it in the Stevenson vote of like, you know, we need to build lots of housing, supply and demand. The problem is that, you know, if you move here and you can afford any house, any unit of housing, if the only thing you can available is, a one bedroom in Victorian, then because supply is low, the people who can't afford a lot are stuck, right? So you build lots of housing and you could take some of the pressure off supply, and then they're focusing, no, you can't do that, you need to just prioritize, as much affordable housing, 100% affordable housing. And we built enough market rate housing, and really, we should be focusing all of our energy on new projects to be as affordable as possible. Who is right?
I mean, we need to build at a city regional level, I think it's 100% clear, we need to build more housing, right? The question then becomes, we've built a lot of housing we've rezoned and allowed for a lot of housing on the eastern side of the city. Where we've built has mostly been on the eastern side of the city, in the Mission, in District 6 and District 10, South of Market, Dog Patch, Bayview, big projects like the shipyard. So what makes me optimistic about that conversation is, there was resistance to build on Stevenson Street because the policymakers feel like there's gentrification pressures because of new housing being built in a low income community like around Sixth. But I think the next question is, okay, if the policymakers don't want that housing, where should we build housing? And that's where I'm optimistic that they'll see Geary or areas that are zoned RH1 or urban. Because we see, like, if you remember, I don't know if you all remember, like the UCSF project at 3333 California, a great project. People tried to say that building was historic because it was kind of a mid-century modern, interesting building. But the arguments about that project, which generally are in a higher income community, from the community were shadow trees and a spot to walk their dog, versus kind of the monster in the Mission a block from here, where the issues are gentrification and displacement of lower income population. So to me, we can sit around and argue about that project on the Mission. I'd rather just go build the projects at 3333 California Street and find projects that we're not gonna argue about gentrification and displacement, because I think we'll be in this endless loop.
Got it, that seems sensible.
It is very practical.
So I think it was in the 19th century that New York City actually annexed Brooklyn, made it part of New York. And obviously, if we're gonna solve our housing issues, it has to be done regionally, but from what I've heard, if you think San Francisco has an issue building a lot of housing, try going to Woodside or, anywhere in Marin practically. And so I guess, there was a moment where we almost annexed Oakland and we didn't. Do you think that was a mistake?
About annexing Oakland?
I mean, I guess.
I'd
I
rather
wanna know your answer.
annex like Ceremony Mall and like Daly City and South City.
Okay, well, I guess the rest of the question, is that another Grateful Dead thing? I'm kidding.
No ceremony.
No, I'm kidding. Is that, do you think there's too many cities, too many municipalities? Should we, it's actually a serious question, right? Like New York City basically took over all these boroughs and it can make policy, whereas
Right,
we're
right,
like,
yeah.
here, and
No,
Sarah
I
Monte
think,
Mall is down there.
so, we look at these issues sometimes regionally through ABAG and MTC, like, has anybody heard of ABAG? Like, correct.
He has,
So many-
Rob knows about ABAG.
Nobody really cares about ABAG because they just talk about stuff and they don't do anything and they don't really have any authority. So, yes, I think right, there's too many small jurisdictions making decisions about what they want to do. And so then the issue is the state comes in, right? The state is the one who's given us the authority to zone. It's really the state's authority to zone, but they pass it down to municipalities and they say, you efforts aren't building enough housing, so we're gonna put in these laws like SB 9 and SB 10 that are kind of blunt, because they're applying a law to San Francisco, the same law to Daly City and Woodside and San Diego, where I think we need to act regionally, but it's tough because there isn't a regional body to act. But if you look and say, we're gonna upzone every retail strip mall corridor in the suburb, you can build thousands and thousands of units of housing and make those communities better.
But who does that? I just actually did a call with a woman, Laura, I don't remember, but she's the mayor of San Carlos, and she's running for supervisorial board of San Mateo, and she was, I talked to her about her housing policies, and she actually wants to build a lot of housing, so like, is that it? Are we trying to elect the right people on these county boards of supervisors, or?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of electing the right people, the state, I mean, I'm not against the state taking action when local jurisdictions don't act. So I think it's a combination of that.
Got it. What do we
And
elect?
maybe a stronger regional, I mean, there could be a regional zoning body,
Yeah,
you know, do I
would you
think
be in
that's
favor
like,
of that?
yeah, I think our economy is at a regional scale.
Do you wanna run it? No?
Not really.
Okay. So a couple more questions, we'll get to audience questions soon. Tragedies.
There's a lot of people interested in planning, I thought there'd be like, you three. Maybe
No,
maybe
people
talk about
care,
three
this
people,
is,
yeah.
yeah, and we're still, you know, we have a lot of people on Zoom too, welcome to Zoom. Tragedy, let's talk about tragedy for a second, not you, you're not a tragedy, but we've had some tragedies. In our, at least I don't really know you that well, but I assume you're not, you don't seem like it,
Like what?
a tragedy,
No, I
you
guess.
seem
not.
great. The 1906 earthquake, Loma Prieta,
Yeah, yeah,
and COVID. I read today that after the earthquake, in 3 years,
the 1906 earthquake.
that one, the city built 20,000 buildings.
Yeah.
New build, new construction, 20,000. Wow, that is amazing. Can you imagine a situation where something like that could happen again? I mean, and do you think that's even good? Not 20,000, but
Yeah.
that, I guess what I'm
I
trying to
mean,
get is,
we went through a period where we, you know, over the last 20 years, if you look at how much housing has been entitled and planned for, you know, if you look at Eastern neighborhoods, Treasure Island, the Shipyard, Pierce Deli, and like the conversion of our more industrial portions of the city to more neighborhoods and housing, Mission Bay. You know, when I moved here 25 years ago, you know, there was a big like golf driving range out in Mission Bay and nothing. You know, when you look at Mission Bay, you may quibble about like the architecture or how it's laid out. But it's been a massive conversion in the Giants ballpark in Pier 70. So I think we're seeing tens of thousands of units.
so I guess, yeah, I was gonna ask, like, does it really take a tragedy on the scale of the 1906 earthquake to build so quickly? But I guess you answered my question, which is not necessarily, I mean, we have built a lot. I mean, Loma Prieta, obviously, people say that it was because of that earthquake that the Embarcadero Freeway
Came down, yeah.
came down, and I guess it just, you know, it makes me a little bit sad because, you know, what if there hadn't been a Loma Prieta earthquake? Would we still have a freeway on the
Yes.
Embarcadero? We
Yeah.
would. So, I mean, I guess, how do you think we get out of this thinking or this, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at, very inarticulately, I should say,
No,
is I don't like that it seems to take major acts of God to get us to make
Yeah, big
sensible
changes.
planning decisions
Yeah.
about our city.
Yeah.
So, how do we get out of that? And then two, do you feel like COVID-19 might be giving us an opportunity to rethink how the city
I
is
mean, I
laid
think
out?
COVID-19 is giving us an opportunity to kind of rethink like downtown and how we work and what we want downtown to look like, or retail. You know, we've focused more on kind of commercial orders, but I don't know if it's probably the practical person in me says, I don't know if it's hard, it's possible to manufacture kind of that crisis mentality to get it. I mean, I think you make a good point, like removal of the double deck freeway around the Embarcadero was genius, you know, and a great planning decision. Would that have happened if not for the earthquake? Probably not.
Yeah, I
you know,
mean,
it's-
like,
Cause I remember going from, like, it took me 5 minutes to get to Chinatown from my house, you just jumped on Fell Street, you zooped around and you went to, you know, there are people like that. You know, so, but it's a genius planning decision. But it took an earthquake to do it. Same with the Central Freeway, right? We've got housing, a boulevard, H and I were talking Hayes Green, the skate park. Those things all came about because, you know, we were able to tear down the freeway and build.
on that scale, if you could, what would you change?
On that scale. I mean, I don't know if I wanna say on that, I mean, on that scale, like Geary Boulevard, you know, Geary is a remnant of the redevelopment days, it's a little freeway. Through the middle of the city that separates Japantown and the western addition. I would get rid of that and return that back to kind of what it was. 2 lanes going in each direction and, retail corridor and housing around it, as well as kind of additional density down here. I think that could be a great street, kind of returning it to what it was like on the eastern side and building up on the western side.
Okay, just a couple more questions. What do you, there are all these stories about things that are taking way too long to get to the planning process. There's sort of a noodle shop, and then there's sort of the ice cream shop, and then, this shop, that shop. And this in general, like, it's too onerous, too complicated, it takes too long. Your planners are making your, lives miserable for everyone. What do you think about all that? Like when you read something like that, and you're like, God damn it, they caught me, or you're like, no, it's not my fault. Like, how do you
Listen,
interpret?
things take too long, right? Those 2 things were not planned, not to be defensive, but neither of those were planning fault. One was the ice cream shop fighting the other ice cream shop, right? And we give them the vehicle to do that. Like, we should be a lot more lenient on, and the mayor did this best prop age during the pandemic. So it's easier to open, like, we all know what retail should look like and, it should be active and you should sell stuff, like, it's not rocket science, right? We shouldn't have these codes that kind of get into the nuances of everybody's business and how much food you sell versus how much alcohol you sell.
Right,
Just let things open, and so we need to dial some of that back, and it does take too long.
and you can, but again, you need the support.
But
of
we can
citizens.
make recommendations
Yeah.
and we can fight for those changes.
You mentioned downtown already. There was an article, I don't know if you all read it in the New York Times this week, I think. It was about San Francisco and how like maybe we can rethink some of our buildings to be used for theater and for arts. And kind of, a lot of people are asking this question, like if we are not, if not all these offices are coming back, there's all these vacancies, what other things could we do with them? Some people were saying turn it into housing, some people are now saying, could you repurpose it for arts? I think they've done that in some parts of Detroit. What do you think? I mean, how are you thinking about this thing? You talked about long range planning.
Yeah.
Is this a like, it's too early, too soon to tell? Do you have a task force within the department that's looking at this, with capes?
We're gonna have one tomorrow. I think it's a little too early to tell. I mean, one, by voter mandate, which is never a good way to do planning, we've limited the amount of office you can build in the city, right? So we're negative in how much, you can't come in today and propose a new office building in San Francisco. Because,
You can't build a new office building?
no. Because.
Did you guys know that?
Yeah.
You knew that. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's now tied to the amount of like us reaching our annual amount of new housing we produce.
Yeah.
We can only build new
Oh.
commercial space if we actually reach what's mandated.
That's
we-
just
Affordable,
passed.
how much affordable,
That's
yeah,
what, that just passed, huh?
past couple of years ago, John Alvin got it
I
passed.
remember that, yeah.
Yeah.
So you can't build a new office building in the city right now.
Nor will you probably be able to in 10 years. So, I'm reluctant to say we should convert all vacant office
It's like a
to
circus.
resident. One, it's hard to convert office to residential, the floor plates are larger. People like light and air when they, in their homes, and sometimes converting an office building is not that conducive to building residential with light and air. I mean, Jimmy, you live in a converted office building, but it's a different,
It was very expensive, doing an office building is not easy.
converting it to
You
residential, yeah.
have to change the height, you have to put all the plumbing in and all that stuff.
Yeah, it sounds hard.
So,
I can do that.
so I don't know,
I can barely do this, honestly.
and I don't think we know yet how people are gonna work a
Right.
decade from now. I think we need to give it a little time coming out of the pandemic. So I think this is gonna change fundamentally how we work. But I don't think we quite know what that's gonna look like. And I don't think we should jump into making zoning changes until we get a feel for kind of what life is like post-pandemic.
Any really cool, exciting thing your department's working on that you like can't tell anyone, but you'll tell us
I
tonight?
just told you about the tallest residential. I
But you
shouldn't have said that, I think it was a glass of wine. But
It's a very small glass, I don't think.
it was like the pencil tower in New York.
But like, it was proposed and you said you
Like,
scoffed, or?
No, legitimately proposed by a legitimate developer.
Yeah, I'm in, like, let's
You're in
go.
for it?
Oh, 100%.
Who would be for it?
Where would it be?
It's not all owned by.
Downtown.
Yeah, like, yeah, like,
By
I
who?
wouldn't want it to be, but you would need it, like, cause they're doing this in Vancouver, where like, yeah, we don't want them to be purchased by like an LLC to just sit there and like gain like whatever.
But do you think that's,
Value and
I
everything.
don't believe that's happening.
It's happening in Vancouver apparently, and I think New York, so we'd have to stop that. But like, yeah, if you made it so that people actually have to live there, I'm in.
Yeah.
One
Well, people
hundred
would live,
percent.
it. I think people would, live it. Is what
Are
I
you
think.
getting it from me, my unit though? Or- I'm probably not. Never mind. That was a joke, it was a joke. No one is getting anything for anything.
Yeah.
Well, what future exciting thing are you working on that you wanna talk about?
Well, that was it, I thought I talked.
Oh, you're working on the giant building.
You know, it's also,
Perfect, I hope there's a reporter in the room.
yeah, but I know you told me what was proposed. Well, here's what I'm telling you about, what I'm excited about what we're working on, is that what you wanna know?
Yes.
Like I said, you wanted me to just throw out exciting nuggets.
That's, that too, I mean, whatever you wanna do.
Here's another exciting nugget, not that I'm excited about it, but this guy bought the Trans-America building, right?
When?
A year ago, he bought it during the pandemic, Schvo, the guy's name is Schvo, SCHVO. He wears,
Just
we
that,
met him,
just like that, like Madonna, just.
yeah, so we went down to meet him at the Trans-America building, you know, he wears like a t-shirt and.
Don't point at me like that. It's hot in here.
$500 shoes, you know, and he hired Norman Foster, you know, the architect Norman Foster to kind of help.
Judge.
Rethink the,
Just want to judge the Trans-American.
that's what we were nervous about, like, what are you gonna do at Trans-America?
I could probably could use some zhuzhing if you've been inside.
But here's what's wrong, here's what was exciting about, so we walked around the building with Schmo, we had like $500 sneakers. And Norman Foster was there too, and he's like, this is not an architecture kind of project, this is urban design. You know, what it's right, like if you had someone from out of town, he said like, and they said, hey, let's go look at the Trans-America building, when you got there, it'd be terribly disappointing, right? It's like kind of boring at the ground floor, there's that park, that's okay, you know, there's like Mark Twain Alley, that's kind of bleak.
It's not like insane, it's not,
But no one
yeah.
goes there, did you ever go, like, I mean, you look at it from
Yeah,
afar.
and inside, there's kind of some conference rooms. It's
Where
not,
are you going to talk for?
I went to a
Your
function,
doctor's offices in
yeah, I
there?
went to a function there once, yeah.
But I think Schmo wants to rethink it. And make it kind of make it more ferry building, like make it a little civic center.
Yeah.
And then have retail that spills out into that
I
kind
like
of promenade,
Schmo.
that park.
I
I
like
kind of like that too.
Is Schmo the one that proposed the giant pencil?
No. But when we went to meet with him, I'm like, yeah, this guy Schmo is gonna be annoying, like, cause he's from New York, with the jeans and the $500 shoes. But he's willing to throw money at the Trans-America building and make the public space
Yeah.
great, and then you'll see, and then Norman Foster's gonna rethink one of the office buildings, so that it's not just the Trans-America building, it's the two buildings on Sansom too. They kind of re-energize one of those buildings on Sansom, it's a cool design, when it comes out, you'll like it, but that's not what I'm terribly excited, I mean, those are whatever, they're interesting shit, that you want to talk about. But what I think is interesting is like you know, we're doing some rethinking about how we work with community, and that it's not all about zoning. You know, it's about, when we're talking to the film Western Edition, which we've never had a great relationship with the community in the Western Edition, the film, I mean, it's been mostly redevelopment and planning hasn't done much. But looking at that area and how, you know, how we right some of the wrongs that redevelopment, we're talking as a Japantown community, and you know, Japantown is an interesting spot, because they, you know, it's a cultural district, but it relies a lot on the private landowner, the mall owner there, that they're gonna continue to rent to businesses that are consistent with Japantown, and there's a strong community. But they wanna work with the property owner to have ownership of a lot of the commercial space in Japantown, maybe do some housing above what's now the malls of Japantown. To really kind of preserve Japantown and have more community ownership of Japantown.
Cool.
So that's not schmo.
Yeah.
But I like it.
I'm
No
gonna,
$500 speakers involved in that.
how did you know there were 500? Did they tell you? You could just tell. Okay, last question. What do you want San Francisco to look and feel like in 2050? And how do you want to be a part of making that
I
happen?
mean, I wanted to look and feel, I wanted to feel like it feels now, but just denser. And listen, San Francisco is a great place, right? We all stayed here or came here because it's a great place to be, right? So we want to continue that, but allow more people to come here and experience San Francisco.
Rich Hillis. Are you recording over there? Oh, I saw your laptop.
Do our reporters here, like you were writing stuff down here?
It's one you, are you? No, you're not a reporter.
No, no.
Okay, okay, go ahead.
Like on the last one.
Yes, can we get a Chardonnay for Rich Hillis?
I live in Civic Center and I bought a lovely book about Civic Center from Manny's lovely bookshop.
Author's right there.
Was it Jim Haas's book? Yeah.
Yeah. Kismet.
And I really like Civic Center. Reading the book, I got all hyped about Civic Center and I'm excited about my new Whole Foods. And I'm wondering how you think it's going in that area because there is a lot of new housing there. And I like living there, but when I tell the people that I live there, they're kind of like.
Well,
Yeah.
they tell you that just the kind of the you know, the street life is a little rough these days, right? But I remember, and I know Jim 25 years and he's been a champion of Civic Center. But when I first started working at City Hall, it was just that there wasn't much going on in Civic Center, right? There's these big blocks with big government and institutional buildings, and there wasn't the activity in the housing there is now. So I think Civic Center is vastly improved from where it was.
Sir.
Is it still getting better?
Is it still getting better? Yeah. No, I think it's,
I'm not gonna mention it in the plan.
well, this.
And the
yeah,
plan.
yeah. Well, this, yes, so the Civic Center Plaza, which these gentlemen are in our office too, is pushing to, I mean, there have been how many iterations of kind of trying to reimagine Civic Center Plaza in the public space around Civic Center Plaza. And one of the biggest problems is it's expensive, terribly expensive, because there's a garage underneath and there's a ton of public space. There's UN Plaza in the you know, the area outside of the library and Civic Center Plaza, which are not great public spaces today. I mean, there's some good things that are happening, like the farmer's market, which is a great farmer's market in Civic Center Plaza. And there are interventions, I mean, the new playgrounds on Civic Center Plaza are good in the cafe space that's there. But that could be a much better public space.
All right, I think we had, oh, sorry, we had.
Mention we have a plan, we have a plan.
And we have plan of words. I think I saw Joe, then you, then Chandru. Joe.
Thinking about like the future of like rezoning or like you talk about Geary Street specifically, I'm thinking like a lot of single family homes or whatever, you could have 5 to 10 story buildings like lining it, but that's a lot of people for public transportation that currently exists in that corridor. And it's taking a really long time to finish the central line, the central subway. And I'm just thinking like, if this is where we're gonna be putting a shit ton of housing, which we probably should, like over the next 10, 15 years, do we need to break ground today on putting all of those, like putting a new Union line literally under the ground?
Yes,
In the Richmond and the Sunset all the way out to the ocean.
yes. You know, we're
All right,
thinking
next
about it,
question.
part of the extension, but it's a little bit chicken and egg, right? Where, you know, people complain there's not, you can't build the housing because there isn't the transit, but we don't wanna build the transit because there aren't the new, you know, residents living there. But we are planning, you know, better transit to the Richmond and the Sunset and BART, you know, the second tube and extending out to Erie and going down 19th. But
If you paid attention to today's SFMTA board meeting, We
Did
voted
you
on
talk
the,
about
we
that?
voted on the 50-year capital plan. $400 million go bond, and you saw the strategic plan that we passed today that we discussed at the board.
Yeah, I did, sure. Yeah.
Great.
But we're not great at implementing, like the central subway. I mean, to try, that should go far, right? It should go to North Beach and Fisherman's Wharf. It's kind of embarrassing that it stops. Not kind of embarrassing, it's embarrassing that it stops in Chinatown. So we need to be more bullish on, our leaders that are gonna push to spend money and to allocate money and to build better trails.
Well, it doesn't actually stop, you know that. And I'm not supposed to say that.
Well, the tunnel goes.
Yeah, the
right?
tunnel actually goes
But
to
it
North
goes
Beach.
to North Beach.
Anyway, next question.
I had a question about maybe just learning more about local politics. I feel like myself and a lot of folks I know learned about politics at a really federal level, and
Yeah.
like even today, right? A lot of us didn't know exactly what the planning commission does in regards or in relation to say the board of supervisors or other arms of government. So what would you recommend for someone looking to learn more about how local government
How it works? It's a good question.
Come to Manny's, obviously.
Yeah.
Hi.
But more about like who, like if I wanted to know who actually is making this decision so that I could go to them and say, I care about
Well,
this.
ultimately, it's the board and the mayor that make decisions on kind of the planning code and where we're gonna build housing. They'll ultimately adopt the housing element. So, I'd get involved in your district, and find out who your district supervisor is, like,
Where do you live?
Mission Day.
Okay,
that's Haney, right?
Yeah.
Districts that, so yeah, but where do you learn about? it?
well, I mean, the truth is, yeah, okay, so yeah, Manny's, but also, there are some really cool journalistic outlets that have come out over the last few years. I would sign up for the SF Minute. It's a really great newsletter that we love. Hearsay Media now is called the San Francisco Standard. They do a lot of good reporting. So there's some good new outlets that are really getting the meat and potatoes.
Mission local.
Mission Local.
And if
Yeah.
there's an issue you're involved, like if you're interested in more house, like a hack or if you're interested in, the mission, get involved with Meta. So, find the issue you wanna get involved in and get involved with advocacy groups or interest groups from that issue.
And like there's a lot of space for direct advocacy in our city. Like I'm on the board of the SMTA and I'm voting on the J Church line a week, and individuals are emailing me and sending me letters and
What's the
calls.
vote? Vote for what?
Right, well, I should have brought that up. Go ahead, next question over here. Oh, Chandra, you were next, and then let's go to the one behind you, then we'll get over to this side. Yes.
Well, my question is much more of a, I've been to a lot of these meetings and people like you, obviously it's not.
How does this one rank?
You explained why you can't say where you want and make changes, which is perfectly, valid and understandable. But I think my question is, eventually, it seems like everybody is on the same page. If you talk to a supervisor, I'm sure they say, oh, we want affordable housing. If you talk to the mayor, I'm sure she wants affordable housing. You want affordable housing, we want affordable housing. So why is it eventually, why don't they waive the wrongs and just change the RH1 zone? What is actually stopping them?
That's a good question. Like, if everyone's saying they support this stuff, why is it so hard to?
Like, that seems like it's low hanging fruit, right? On Thursday of this week, the planning commission is reviewing Supervisor Mandelman's legislation, which will change RH1 zoning to RH4, right? So it'll allow 4 plexes.
Okay, so you're saying.
So that's moving its way through the process, but I agree with you, like, that's kind of low hanging fruit, right? In changing that zoning. So is going out Geary, you can add a lot more density out Geary or Irving or Terraville just by saying, build to the height limit. We'll allow you to fill the envelope, like build to the height limit and allow for the rear yard setback. That stuff's fairly easy, but doesn't necessarily get done. It's a good question on why, like, who's out there,
I have my opinions as to why.
you go,
Can I just ask you?
Well, go ahead.
Yeah,
That doesn't matter.
I've read that, I just have a degree in urban planning, which, I never used it. So, it's like a little knowledge, unfortunately. But I've heard that actually building affordable housing is more expensive than regular housing. Is that generally speaking true?
Is it true that building affordable housing is more expensive than regular housing?
I mean, generally with affordable housing, it's, the city is contributing to build affordable housing, so you need to, you're required to go through kind of the city contracting procedures, which add costs. But ultimately, it's the same, it's the same wood and range and plumbing that's regular housing. So I think building affordable housing and market rate housing, the cost should be relatively the same. I think, that because of some of the requirements the city has, it adds to cost to build affordable housing. But, some of the affordable housing generally designed great, same architects are designing the same layouts. So it shouldn't cost more.
Though I feel like, well, okay, go ahead, next question. And then we're gonna go to this side. Are you, okay,
Yes. So one of the things I wanted to ask is that you sort of like mentioned this, that it seems like for some reason in San Francisco and maybe just in the US in general, like building new public transit takes forever.
Yeah.
And like costs so much money. Whereas like if you like contrast it with maybe like other countries, like say like Asia, it happens so fast. And it seems like I'm not super well versed in history, but it seems like this like a recent thing that projects cost so much money and take a lot of time. So I'm just like wondering what your perspective is, like why do you think that is, and is there anything you could do to like fix that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've always been costly and taken a lot of time. You hear horror stories about BART being constructed down Market Street, right, and disrupting Market Street and putting businesses out of business for years. But I think when you're 10 years past it, like, of course, that was a great idea, building BART, and building a tunnel on Market Street, but we weren't around, we weren't suffering through that. So to some extent, you gotta bite the bullet and just do it. I think it's always been costly.
sounds like there's a follow-up.
I mean, I feel like I don't have specific examples,
Yeah.
but I just remember like reading things that it's just gotten more expensive and costly. And there's like much more like red tape now than there used to be. Like I've heard things about the like New York subway like taking much less time.
Right.
When
But that was built 100 years ago.
I mean, even so,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
That
and
Golden
also,
Gate
like,
Bridge was
Asia,
built in
right?
like what, 2 years? I think it was 2.5 years.
Yeah, I
to
just
build it.
Yeah.
like take China for, I mean, that's not the best example, but like other countries get these things done like so fast.
Right.
So I think it's maybe like unacceptable to say it's just an inherent process. I think there's something about the way we do things that makes it much more difficult.
Yeah.
And
Are we too bureaucratic? Is it opaque?
Well,
Is it
definitely, there's CEQA, right? You've got to go through a CEQA process.
is
So
done.
like the entitlement process to get to a point where you can actually build something is long and arduous, and people sue. We're more
maybe we
litigious
should stop
than we were. But then you need, you need to change like CEQA law, which the biggest proponents of CEQA are labor. Because that's where labor is able to negotiate and say, we want this project to hire union labor, which I think is a good thing, right? We should be trying to do that. So, I mean, I think I agree with you. I don't know if there's a silver bullet to fix.
Sure, but I'm just curious
Yeah.
about what some of the like sticking points are, because I think just saying, oh, it's a big thing, like that's not,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
me, like that feels insufficient.
No, I mean, the central subway is taking, I mean, you know more, right?
Next question over here. Your next one.
You made reference to some of the progress that the state legislature has made recently. Just curious, given the fact that it seems as though in Sacramento, there's been a lot of slow progress on housing. And now, if you're listening to lawmakers in Sacramento right now, a lot of progress in the last legislative session. What's the most recent bills that have had local impact on San Francisco?
So SB 9, which just passed, and SB 10. So SB 10 says you don't have to do environmental review if you're rezoning and allowing for 10 units or less. So supervisor Mandelman's legislation, which is up in planning, to rezone the entire city and allow fourplexes everywhere. We would have had to wait for the housing element EIR, which could have been 2023, to be adopted in order to take up that legislation. Given that SB 10 is passed, we can adopt that January 1. So that's great. I mean, it's still relatively small, like 10 units or less to avoid CEQA. And then SB 9 passed, which basically says in areas that are zoned RH1, you can build 2 units, or you can split a lot and build 4 units, or you can build 2 units with an ADU. So it in essence has upzoned RH1 to like RH3 to allow for 3 units. That one's complicated though, and cities can get around it. I mean, and this is the game municipalities will play, like cities can get around SB 9 by just rezoning everything to RH2. And then it kind of makes SB 9 irrelevant. So, but I think it's been good that the state, you know, not just saying through like its RENA goals to municipalities, build more housing, but then passing laws that kind of require the cities to do certain things to build more housing. I mean, one good thing, SB 35, which passed a couple of years ago, which I think is a powerful bill, says if you don't meet your RENA goals, which we haven't met our RENA goals for affordable, but we've met them for market rate, but we won't meet them for market rate once they tick up. It says if you're not meeting them and somebody comes in with a code compliant project, it's ministerially approved. So the McDonald's site on Stanion, the Irving affordable housing, the group housing on Daharo, which is market rating 50% affordable, those are being approved like with lightning speed. No CEQA, no planning commission approval, no ability to kind of DR them or appeal them to the board of supervisors. So it's putting teeth into some of the state requirements to say build more housing.
Is this where your optimism is coming from? The swag that I'm feeling?
Yeah,
here?
well, it's a little bit, yeah. I
Okay,
think it's good. I think it's good. We're getting pressure from the state to do more.
yeah,
And I think the city's responding
good.
by doing more. So
Mazel tov.
I think
Did you have a question, Rob?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna ask about how do you put teeth into RENA goals?
well, that's like SB 35.
Yeah, and the second question is, I think other cities have like actually broken down neighborhoods and actually given neighborhoods like goals to build affordable housing.
Yeah.
Like
Ooh.
DC. I'm hearing you say that like there are just certain neighborhoods that don't actually take responsibility for their share of
Right.
housing folks. And so how do we make this everyone's problem as opposed to certain neighborhoods'
Yeah.
problems?
Anyone hear that on this side? Yeah.
Well, I think we've got to change the zone, right? 15 years ago, the planning department went out and did better neighborhoods, right? Rezoned eastern neighborhoods, Market Octavia, south of Market. Balboa. It's resulted in the housing we're being, that's where we're seeing housing, is where we rezone. And so I think the next phase is to go to the areas we didn't rezone. And it doesn't necessarily mean like we want 40-story buildings on Geary. But we've got an 8-story building or a 10-story building on Geary and Masonic. Like, I don't think that's
But by,
pushing the envelope too much.
but by the numbers, who's like the worst actor in the city by neighborhood?
I mean, it's the west, the western side of the city is a marina, Pack Heights, the Richmond, the Sunset. The zoning doesn't allow for more housing.
Yeah.
It's restricted. In the zoning here in South of Market, not only does it allow for more, but then you can take state benefits on top of that. So you can pair up the city zoning with the state density bonus. And you can get like a Stevenson Street project.
Stop looking at me. You're answering a question. I'm having business over here.
Talking about this next.
I'm
Who's
gonna
up
give,
next? Who's
Tomas
up
is
next?
gonna be asking the final question.
Okay.
Because he doesn't normally do it, and I wanna give it to him.
Yeah, where you can't do that, you can't do that on Geary. I don't mean to pick on Geary, like Terraville's the same way. Stonestown.
All right, it's 8 o'clock, final question.
So Manny asked about what your vision is of San Francisco in 2050. Where does kind of the changes and material changes to climate change parlay into your vision of 2050 in San Francisco?
I mean, I think it impacts where we. I mean, clearly there's a waterfront, isn't there? We've got a, there's sea level rise and, we're making decisions about what to build along the waterfront that probably aren't wise for looking ahead to 2050. So the port's actually been very good at kind of looking at what we have to do to adapt our shoreline in response to sea level rise.
What does that look like? Or what has that looked like so far?
I mean, it probably is gonna look like less, less of the built environment happening, along our shoreline and pulling back and more open space along the shoreline, like the Embarcadero, may not be there, and looking at kind of how you mitigate for the bay rising in sea level.
All right, before I do my little, closing moment, let's give a round of applause to the director of the Housing Department. Hey, you got a nice job. I really like your vibe, your energy. I've interviewed a lot of bureaucrats and a lot of folks in city government.
You made Grand Colfax.
I did make Grand Colfax. I did make Grand
There's no
Colfax.
trying.
Not yet, come back soon, part 2, y'all. I didn't realize this was a challenge accepted. But I really appreciate this. So you are awesome, and I'm really glad you're in this role, and it's been really wonderful getting to know you, and I'm excited to see all the things that you continue to do. So it makes me happy. I'm gonna go home tonight feeling just a teeny little bit lighter in my loafers, as they say.
Thank you for having me. It's a great experience.
Right? Isn't that a thing? Yeah, or is that a different thing?
Oh, geez.
Mazel tov! That's how you make me feel. Tomorrow, we have a conversation on wildfires and fighting the mega fires in our state with folks from the California Natural Resources Board. We also have a woman who's the former Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court who's running for Senate, Cherry Beasley. She's going to be doing a mixer in the front. We also have a fundraiser for climate change makers. So 3 events tomorrow. I want to bring that to your attention. And then one more thing I wanted to talk about, which is the last event before Thanksgiving, is next week. The Dean of the Berkeley Law School, Erwin Chemerinsky, came out with a new book, and he'll be doing a book talk here next Tuesday. Lots of amazing events. At Manny's, you can find out more about our programming at welcometomannys.com. I would be remiss if I didn't mention how a space like this exists in San Francisco in 2021, which is that we're actually funded by a community of individual sponsors. I see a couple sponsors in the audience. I see sponsor number 1 in the audience over there, Jim Hass. So it's really awesome. People pay $36 up to $360 a month to support our work and allow us to do this, never turning anyone away for lack of funds, never saying no to any organization, nonprofit, advocacy group that wants to rent out the space for their work, and to allow us to rent out our restaurant to a nonprofit that hires and trains formerly homeless, formerly incarcerated individuals in our kitchen. So it's a cool spot, and we're only able to do it because of our sponsors. So there's a QR code up there. If you lift up your phone, it actually does reach that code. So no one has to see you do it, but you can scan it from your seats. Or you can also go to welcometomannys.com and become a sponsor. I hope that you all also leave tonight having a little bit more faith in your city, because I know that it's so easy to read the headlines and read the news and read about housing not getting built and this not happening, and to think, to be down on San Francisco. But I hope that actually meeting a leader of this particular department, hearing what he has to say and what he wants to do, can make you go home and think, you know what? San Francisco's got some really good people running these departments, and at least there's that. Have a good night, everyone.